My name is Amanda Whitworth, and I live in Seattle, Washington. And my cancer journey has been a very, very, very long journey. So I'm going to have to take you all the way back to 1999 because it didn't really begin with me. It began with my mom. And in 1999, I was 19 years old, freshman in college, and I received a phone call from my mom one day, and she said, "Mandy, I wanted to let you know I have cancer." And my heart just sunk because back then, cancer still felt like an ultimate death sentence. And so she was diagnosed with endometrial cancer. And then I think it was 3 years later, so 2022, my older brother was 26 at the time and started getting really, really sick. I remember the day so clearly. He had a colonoscopy and he was diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer. And my mom's like, "Honey, we need to get you and Nick, who's my younger brother, we need to get you guys colonoscopies." And I was like, "No, there's no way I'm going to go get a colonoscopy." And so I put it off. I started noticing some newer symptoms. It was about August, September 2004. And I had just gone back to school. So I was finishing my college degree. So I just chalked them all up to working full time and going back to school. But it was like just massive fatigue. I wanted to sleep all the time when I came home from school or work. My bowel habits changed. I had this like really chalky complexion. I don't know how to describe it really, but it was just like, it felt like I was not absorbing all the nutrients that my body was taking in. And so my gut was starting to say, okay, I think I need to go in and get this colonoscopy. So that led me to make an appointment, and it was 2 days after Christmas, December of 2004, and I went in for my colonoscopy. When I came to, I remember hearing my doctor talking to the nurse and saying, "You need to go get her mom and bring her back to my office." And I was like, oh my gosh, like, how can this be happening? I just automatically was like, something's wrong. So from there, I didn't have full-blown cancer yet, but I had a very large colon polyp that was in weeks before turning into cancer. It was estimated. There was like no way to absolutely tell, but it was within weeks to a few months. So I had to have part of my colon and my rectum removed. That's a whole story in and of itself because lots of stuff happened from that surgery, and I almost died from that surgery. But it was because of that we realized that we needed to be tested for any kind of genetic abnormality, which led my mom to get tested because back then there were insurance laws that my brother and I didn't want to get tested because if it came back as anything, we could potentially not get health insurance. So, but my mom was tested and she came back positive for what is called Lynch syndrome. And that is kind of how the rest of the journey unfolds from there. Over the course of, so from 2004 to present day, there was just so many different things that happened. It wasn't until 2017 that I was actually genetically tested and tested positive for Lynch syndrome. And then in 2017, I developed a lump in my lymph node in my left groin, and it kind of popped out overnight. And it was like a little bit smaller, but it was concerning. I was just coming off of a season of doing like triathlons and races. I climbed Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the lower 48. And so I was like the epitome of health at that point. So my first thought wasn't oh, this is potentially cancer. It was like, oh, I have some kind of infection. And so I went into the doctor, and I was just like, this is really concerning. At the time, I had something called bacterial vaginosis as well. And so they just chalked it up to that. And I was like, well, this is my family's history. I would be much more comfortable if you would do a biopsy, or we could schedule a biopsy. And they were like, yeah, we don't think you need that. We really don't think you need that. And my gut was just like, I want a biopsy. And something was just screaming inside of me to get a biopsy. But they put me on antibiotics, and it went away. And so then 6 months later, the lump came back, and it came back with a vengeance. And it just, it was probably like that big in my left groin. And I lost a lot of weight. And so I went into the same clinic, but I saw a different doctor, and I was like, I want to get this biopsied. And I'm like, this is very concerning. I did have bacterial vaginosis again. And, but I was like, I think this is a symptom of something else. I think that something's going on, and this is why I'm getting this. I knew enough about my body to know that something was wrong. And so she's like, I agree with you. And she was an awesome, awesome doctor. And I never felt like I had to push for anything with her. If I said I wanted something, she was like, no problem. We'll do it. So I went and got this biopsied, and then it was St. Patrick's Day. I was working at a restaurant at the time, and I was heading out the door to go to work, and I got a phone call from her. And she was like, I got your test results back, and it is cancer. The blood just drained from me. And I was like, well, this is in my immediate thought was like, this is in my lymph node, so it must be lymphoma. And then I just started like spiraling. She's like, so then she continued on, and she's like, well, the actual diagnosis is called metastatic cancer of an unknown primary source. She gave me the cell type. So it was the squamous cell. And so then I had to undergo a bunch of other testing. I had to do everything under the sun to try to figure out where this was coming from, because they ruled out lymphoma. They just started ruling out everything. And then she got me into an oncologist at Moore's Cancer Institute down in San Diego, because that's where I was living at the time. And the final diagnosis, because they could not find any primary tumor, because they did know that this was the secondary tumor, but they could not find any primary tumor. So my final diagnosis was metastatic cancer of an unknown primary, which is it's very rare. I had colonoscopies. I had CT scans, PET scans. I had a bunch of other procedures done to rule out everything. I saw, I think, 5 different types of oncologists back then. And ultimately, they couldn't find anything. And so I settled with a gynecological oncologist who I just, to this day, adore. And we went the route of it was more than likely some kind of gynecological cancer that was the primary source. But there's just, it's so rare, and either like it came out and my body attacked that, but not before a cell got loose into my lymph node. I feel like I have been incredibly lucky with landing on just amazing support, like having an amazing support team. I know that people have horror stories. I feel like I've been in the medical world for so long that I have a pretty good gauge around who I can and cannot work with. The treatment plan was a little bit up in the air, because this is a rare cancer. And ultimately, there was talks of me doing chemotherapy and radiation, but we settled on surgery and radiation. I was pretty adamant that I did not want to do chemotherapy. I just had a very strong opinion about not doing it, primarily because there was no primary tumor and they got all of the cancer out. And So I did settle on radiation back then. I felt like radiation was the lesser of both evils, but after going through radiation, my opinion about it has completely changed. I don't think that there's a lesser of either one. They're both horrible and they both come with horrible side effects. But at the same time, I mean, they save so many lives. So that comes to my latest cancer diagnosis. About August of 2022, I started just feeling like this fullness in my pelvis. And I was really busy at the time. I'm an artist and I flip furniture for a living. And so I kind of was just like fully engrossed. And then I was moving into the spot that I'm currently in right now. So I had all this stuff going on, plus the grief of losing my stepdad. But I had this like dull, like new pressure in my pelvis. So I was like just kind of keeping tabs on that. And then it was around my birthday, which is September 6th, that it just started feeling like stronger and stronger. It started to feel like I was being like pushed open from the inside of my pelvis. And so I called my oncologist.
I'm going to show you something kind of crazy. This is me just comfortably relaxing my stomach. This is not normal.
And so I gave him a call and I was like, I feel like I need to come in and see you. Something just feels off. So I went in and saw him and gave me like a physical exam. And he said he did feel something in there. And so he got me orders for a CT scan. And so in mid-October, I got a CT scan and there was a grapefruit-sized mass in my pelvis.
This is mass growing. And I wonder why I can barely breathe. Because I look like I'm 3 months pregnant.
A good portion of it was cystic, but there was a small portion at the very base that was solid. And I just knew I knew that it was cancer. And so the amount of pain, it went from like sort of painful to like excruciatingly painful within like 2 weeks. I had a trip to Disneyland with my family planned in October and went to that. And it was just like horribly uncomfortable. I'd lost a lot of weight. And when I got back, or right before I went to that trip, I had to go to the ER because I hadn't had any bowel movements for, gosh, I think it was like five days. And so the mass was like wrapping around my colon. So we got me scheduled for surgery. I knew I was going to have surgery to remove it. And at that point I just wanted it out. So I didn't care like honestly what they had to do. I mean, it was like being ripped apart from the inside out, and it was growing really, really fast.
It feels like every time my life is going in a good direction, something happens like this. Something comes up with my health. They find something in a screening, and then it totally derails me.
I was kind of in and out, but I do remember every time a nurse came in, I was like, is it cancer? Like, what cancer is it? And she's like, your doctor will be in and talk to you, in the morning. And so he came in around 6 a.m., 6 or 7 a.m., and confirmed that most of it was cystic, but there was a small portion down in the base that was cancer. And it was the same cell type, the squamous cell. Initially, I was diagnosed with like an endometrial carcinoma. Later, after they like sent it off to another specialist, it came back as my official diagnosis is called Extraovarian primary peritoneal carcinoma, which is very confusing. So when I went in to see my oncologist, we talked about how my biggest concern was I had really, really long, beautiful curly hair. And I was like, I really don't want to lose my hair. Like, I'm adamant about that. And I was like, I know a lot of people are not going to understand this, but I I feel very strongly about, like, if you got all the cancer, if you feel like you got all the cancer, I just don't want to do chemotherapy. And he's like, well, there is a potential, like, I could put you on one that, or most likely won't lose your hair. And I was like, okay, well, if you feel like you can do that, I'll do that. But we were originally just going to see if we could go the radiation route. And it turns out I couldn't do radiation because too much of my previous area that was radiated before would be covered. And it was just too dangerous. That eliminated radiation. So if I chose to, I had to go the chemotherapy route. So then my brother and I went back to him. He presented all of the options for me. And one of the options was I could do a mix of carboplatin and I think it's like doxil something, and I wouldn't lose my hair. But then he presented me the option I could do a mix of carboplatin and taxol, and mix it with KEYTRUDA immunotherapy. And there were so many studies coming out showing that like incredible things were happening with this immunotherapy, but I would lose my hair.
Today is the day. Just today. This is how much hair has fallen out. Let's go cut my hair.
I mean, it was a no-brainer for me. Like, he's like, there are studies showing that KEYTRUDA is like bringing your reoccurrence rate down to like next to nothing. And so it was a no-brainer for me, especially having Lynch syndrome and knowing that I have such a high chance of reoccurrence rates and a laundry list of cancers that I can get. But it was a really tough decision, a tough day for me. Let's just say that I knew I was going to do it, but I had to like wrap my head around it. And then 2 weeks later, I was at my first chemo appointment. With chemotherapy, I had no idea what I was getting. Like, I had no idea what to expect. You can read and read and read, and everybody's bodies are so different. And so I like to say that I have a higher pain tolerance because I do. But, I went into that first chemotherapy session just extremely nervous. I was trying to preserve my hair, so I did cold capping, but it didn't work.
I am very uncomfortable with the bald patches that are starting to happen on the side of my head, like that. So we are gonna go shave it.
Yeah.
It was interesting because the nurses, who are phenomenal, would kind of give you insight into what to expect over the course of the following days. And I definitely had so day one was on a Friday. That night, they're like, you probably won't sleep or you'll be up at 3 a.m. painting your bathroom or something. And I slept fine that night. But the next day I had so much energy. I was like, Mom, if this is what it's like, I'm fine. This is great. I can do this. And then it was Sunday. I went to lunch with my family, and it was right about that time, 1, 2 o'clock, all of a sudden, there's a beach here in Seattle called Alki, and we were walking down that beach, and all of a sudden my legs felt like tree trunks, and I was like, Mom, I have to go home. I feel like I can't walk anymore. And so went home and laid on the couch and just proceeded to fall into the most excruciating pain I've ever felt in my life. And it was like all my bones were crushing. I had a splitting headache. The one thing that I don't remember anybody telling me was to take Claritin. And I did call my doctor, because after I think it was 3 days of feeling this way, I was like, if this is how I'm going to feel, I'm not doing this anymore. I cannot do 5 more of these. And I'm like, is this ever gonna go away? Is this how I'm going to feel for the next 4.5 months? Because I was having 6 rounds of chemotherapy, and they're like, well, and then I'm very active on my social media, so I was putting it out there in my stories, and people kept writing back to me and they're like, are you on Claritin? Are you on Claritin? And I'm like, what do you mean am I on Claritin? Like nobody ever told me to be on Claritin. And so I did start taking that and it was like night and day difference. What I do for a living is very labor intensive. I'm an artist, so a woodworker, and I flip furniture, and I'm a creative and content creator. So working was a little bit challenging, but I still did it when I felt okay. One thing that I did prior or right after my first chemotherapy session, it might have been prior or right after, I got so many people asking what I needed, and it was wonderful, but also very, very like very hard for me to respond to everybody. So I started thinking more about, I'm like, you know what? We do wedding registries, we do birth registries. I'm like, I'm putting together a friggin' cancer gift registry because why not? Like, I don't have kids, I'm not married, like, but this is what I go through. And if people want to help and everybody wants to help, I'm going to lay out exactly what I need. And so, yeah, I put together a document and I put it on my website. And then I shared it on all my socials. My response to the treatment, I am in full remission now. I was supposed to do 6 rounds of KEYTRUDA, but it's the generic version. I just don't know how to pronounce it. I was supposed to do 6 rounds with my chemotherapy, but my insurance kept denying it. So I actually only did 2 rounds of it with chemotherapy. And so I'm doing 2 additional years of immunotherapy now. I seem to be tolerating immunotherapy pretty well. I would say one piece of advice is like all of the Facebook groups are wonderful and you can find a lot of comfort in there, but you can also find a lot of unnecessary fear. And, just because one person went through something doesn't mean that you're going to go through it. So I try to limit my time in there. If I am experiencing something, like one of the things I do, like I have it right now, like I get pretty bad rashes on my face that looks like acne, but I get it all over my face and my chest after some, like every immunotherapy is different. I always say it's like a Russian roulette because I never know what I'm going to get afterwards. Like over the summer, I got my whole body head to toe was just covered in like this horrible rash after one session, but that never happened again. And so I have therapy every 3 weeks. And so I have 1 more year of it. Pretty easy. You go in, it's still like a 4-hour day because I have to get labs. I meet with my doctor. And then the actual treatment itself is like from the time that they put it up. And the amount of time is only 30 minutes. So it's way different than chemotherapy, which was like a full day at the hospital. But you still have to do all those other little steps too. One of a major side effect is it affects your thyroid.
So my whole life, everybody has been like, oh my God, Amanda, I want your hair so bad. You have the most beautiful hair. I want curly hair so bad. You know, are you sure about that?
Obviously, like I'm growing my hair back now. And there's not those kinds of side effects. You still grow your hair back. But one of the ways that it really affects me is fatigue, and like my breathing. It really it can affect your lungs. For me, it does affect my lungs. And so I have to take like a lot more deep, longer breaths, and it's hard. I get winded faster. And I'm actually currently seeing a neurologist because I do think it's affecting I don't know if it's post chemo changes, but there's some things going on with neurologically right now. And I don't know, he doesn't know that it's necessarily from KEYTRUDA, but we're just like crossing all our T's and dotting all our I's right now. So they just go through my port and it's pretty easy. It takes 30 minutes from start to finish. And then, so you're usually in the chair for about a total of an hour, just because sometimes the pharmacy takes a while to get you the medication, but you don't have any, like with chemo, you usually get Benadryl. So I drive myself and, yeah, it's pretty, usually that afternoon, like I get them in the mornings, and then I come home and sometimes it gives me a little bit of a stomach ache. So I want to stay inside and be close to the bathroom. But other times, like I'll go out in my workshop and work. I mean, I think people don't understand that like there are so many tools if you go through your hospital social worker. It's just not discussed a lot. And so people feel like, oh, I can't get this, so I'm just out of luck. But just talk to your social worker at your hospital. There's usually always something that can be done, or at least they can try to do something. And so my social worker went directly to the company that makes it. And it's all income based. I think my biggest message is like always listen to yourself and push for the things that you feel in your heart that you want, and make sure that your team really listens to you, because that's like they're your team for the long haul. And just because you are going through cancer right now doesn't mean that once you go through treatment and if you go into remission then it's done. Like you're with them for the long haul, and so you want to be very, very comfortable with them. And my team knows that I like to do a mix of holistic and Western medicine, and I'm grateful for both. And one of my oncologists said the most amazing things to me, and he's like, there's great things about Western medicine and there's great things about like holistic medicine, and they work really great, like symbiotically together. And I just loved that he said that to me, because I just felt heard. And so just find somebody that makes you feel heard, and just try to live your life. It's the scariest thing you will probably ever go through, but you have to keep finding life in the little moments throughout your day.